The sound of the world ending is not a roar. It is not a crash of thunder. It is a sharp, clean crack, the sound of the sea's own bones snapping. I am Hakon, whom the Skalds call Wavebreaker, Thane of the Raven clan. My blood has always been salt, and my path has always been the black road of the deep water. Today the water is dead. We were returning from the soft lands of the west, our longships, the Sea Raven and her sisters, heavy with stolen silver and heavy hearts. The wind had been our slave, driving us home through the mist, into the shelter of our home fjord. I was already tasting the mead, already smelling the wood smoke of the great hall. I looked at the sea, the dark, churning mother that always welcomed us back. Then the sky above the peaks ripped. A streak of azure fire lanced down, silent as a falling star, hitting the center of the fjord with a soundless pressure. For a heartbeat, there was only the pulse of that indigo light, drinking the mist, drinking the sound. Then came the crack. I have seen ice in the winter, the white skin of the lakes. This was not winter. This was magic. The water didn't freeze, it shattered into solid form. I watched from the steering oar as a vertical wall of blue-black ice, thick as a mountain's base, erupted from the waves. It spread with terrifying speed, a virus of cold that defiled the very spirit of the sea. The Sea Raven did not stop. It was stopped. The ice rose up, catching the ship mid-roll. The oak hull groaned, a sound like a living thing being crushed slow. The mast snapped, throwing the sail over the crew. I was thrown forward, my face smashing into the frozen planking, the taste of blood mixing with the sudden, impossible cold. Around us the fjord was gone. It was now a jagged landscape of shattered glass, a canyon of ice walls hundreds of feet high that trapped our ships in their stony embrace. Silence. Then from the center of the fjord, where the azure light had struck, the thrumming began. It was a low, subsonic vibration that shook the teeth in my gums and made the ice around the ship ring like a temple bell. Through the blue depths of the new glacier I saw the source. A massive, crystalline obelisk, pulsing with a cyan maggot light, its base fusing with the rock of the seabed far below. Thane. Eirik, my second, his face a mask of white frost, pulled me up from the deck. What sorcery is this? I didn't answer. I drew the heavy meteor iron axe I had carried since my manhood. I didn't need to answer. The mist was clearing and the dark fjord walls were revealed, not covered in pines, but encased in a smooth, crystalline gray shell. And things were moving on that shell. They dropped from the heights. They didn't fall, they navigated the sheer ice with the horrifying fluid grace of a spider. They were the abyssal walkers. That is what my blood called them, a name born of ancestral terror. They were the size of a longship's cabin, a nightmare blend of flesh and metal. Their bodies were covered in armored plates that shifted and slid like a puzzle box. Tentacles, thick as a man's torso and capped with shimmering biomechanical tips, lashed out, gripping the ice. Ocular sensors, red, cold, and numerous, fixed upon the trapped fleet. They were not from the land and they were not from the sky. They were from the crushing, black deep, and they had brought their dark god with them. Shield wall. On the ice. For the Raven. I roared, the air freezing my breath as it left my lungs. We scrambled over the frozen hull, sliding down the sides onto the fractured surface of the fjord. We were sailors, not mountaineers, but the Terror was a master of new skills. We locked the round shields, the metal rims clashing in the unnatural quiet. My 50 men, all that was left of the Raven's primary raiding force, formed a circle of wood and steel in the center of a glass abyss. The first abyssal walker hit the ice 50 paces away. The impact cracked the fjord surface, sending shards of ice flying. It didn't wait. A central aperture in its armored face opened, and a jet of pressurized gray fluid, not water, not blood, but a caustic heavy liquid, erupted with the force of a geyser. The jet hit Olaf's shield. The oak disintegrated, the iron boss melting in a spray of white steam and corrosive slag. Olaf didn't even scream. He was gone, a memory of red and black in the cyan mist. Scatter. They don't need fear. They need meat. We broke formation. A shield wall was a tomb against that pressure. I ran toward the first walker, sliding through the frost-slicked muck. Eirik was to my left, his composite bow already bent. He fired an arrow tipped with vulva fire, a mixture of naphtha and a blue salt we'd salvaged from an earlier skirmish. The arrow struck a shifting plate on the walker's flank. The vulva fire ignites, the blue flame burning the alien biomechanics. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched digital sound of pure agony. The distraction was all I needed. I leaped. I planted my boot on a fractured ice wall, using the momentum to catapult myself over the caustic fluid jet. I came down on the creature's central carapace. The armored plating was warm, vibrating with that low-frequency thrum. I didn't think. I swung the meteor iron axe with every ounce of my rage. The heavy blade sheared through the armored shell. It didn't bleed red. It bled a glowing, bioluminescent blue ichor that hissed as it touched the ice. The tentacles lashed out blindly, one catching my arm, the pressurized grip crushing the bone. I roared, the pain a distant thing, and used my other hand to drive the axe head deeper into the creature's core. The creature's central sensor eye flared white, then dark. Its biomechanics failed, and it collapsed, its massive weight cracking the ice once more and throwing me 20 feet away into a frost bank. I pulled myself up, my right arm screaming in a new, cold language. The fjord was a battlefield of blue and red. My men were fighting, dying, visceral struggles against horrors that knew no fear. I saw Bjorn being dragged into a crack in the ice by a set of tentacles that appeared from the depths. I saw Leaf being vaporized by a plasma-like jet of water. There were too many of them. The obelisk was calling them. The thrumming was getting louder, a signal being transmitted to the deepest trenches of the ocean. The anchor. Hakon. The anchor is pulling the fjord down. Eirik, bleeding from a dozen wounds, was beside me, his bow broken. I looked toward the obelisk, the freezer anchor. He was right. The obelisk was not just freezing the water, it was sinking it. The enormous walls of ice around us were beginning to slide, the base of the new glacier grinding against the rock of the fjord. They were creating an artificial deep-sea canyon, pulling the surface, the ships, and the world we knew into the abyss. Hakon Wavebreaker. There is only one path. A voice called from the darkness. It was Asbjorn, the skald, his face tattered but his eyes burning. He was holding a large leather sack of sea pitch, a crude, ancient form of Greek fire. He didn't need to finish the thought. Skalds are historians of the dead, and he knew the skalds of the Raven clan always finished their songs in the fire. Asbjorn. Get it to the core. I will make you a path. I looked at my men, the 15 that were still standing. We were ghosts, covered in blue ichor and frost. For the Raven. The fearless. We burn their sea and take them with us. We charged. It was a madness. We were no longer fighting for life. We were fighting for the purity of the end. We slammed into the next wave of abyssal walkers. Eirik was gone, swallowed by a caustic fluid jet, but Asbjorn and I were running, using the chaos, using the dead. We reached the base of the freezer anchor. Up close, the obsidian crystal was 10 longships high. The air was so cold the skin on my face began to peel. The obelisk wasn't vibrating, it was shouting a signal that defied all logic. Abyssal walkers were everywhere, guarding their god anchor. They formed a wall of armor and tentacles. I didn't try to go around. I channeled the pain of my crushed arm into the soul hammer I had used to break the walker's shell. I swung, not at the creatures but at the ice beneath their feet. The meteor iron axe struck the primary fracture line of the fjord. The blue ice didn't just crack, it shrieked. A discharge of white pressure erupted from the strike. The 3 walkers guarding the core were thrown backward, their gravity wells failing. The path was open. Asbjorn, with the skald's true clarity of purpose, didn't hesitate. He ran through the vaporized ice, his own red cape igniting from the blue energy of the anchor. He didn't throw the sea pitch. He embraced the obelisk. Asbjorn. No. Remember the song Wavebreaker? He roared, and then Asbjorn, the skald, and the sea pitch detonated. The explosion wasn't a roar of flame, it was a burst of localized, cold vacuum. The mixture, amplified by the anchor's own cyan energy, triggered a terminal overload. The obsidian core of the obelisk didn't melt, it unmade itself. The subsonic thrumming stopped with the finality of a heart stopping. The indigo light died, replaced by a violent, soundless supernova of white pressure. The abyssal walkers, connected to the anchor's neural web, let out a synchronized shriek and collapsed where they stood. They did not melt, they became inert, gray skeletons of metal and bone, their biomechanics failing as their god mind was extinguished. The obelisk imploded, its massive crystalline shards collapsing into the vortex of its own failed gravity. The extreme cold that had flash-frozen the fjord vanished. For a moment, the silence was louder than the explosion. The fjord was a landscape of blue ice and dead star spawn, bathed in the natural, honest gray light of the Norwegian afternoon. The water, no longer held by the alien gravity, was beginning to move again. The glacier was fracturing, the walls of the fjord beginning to settle. I pulled myself up, my right arm a ruined mess, my meteor iron axe broken in my hand. I was alone. There were no more ravens on the ice. Only the skald's song, written in the smoke and the ash over the collapsed anchor. I looked at the longships. The Sea Raven was a crushed wreck, but it was on the surface. The fjord was not sinking anymore. I dropped the broken axe into the blue ice and sheathed my remaining gladius with a final, definite clack. I had broken the waves, and then the waves had frozen, and now the waves were free again. I didn't pray to Odin. I didn't pray to the gods of the soft lands. I looked at the dark water of the fjord, the dark water that held my men, my skald, my second. The sea has new gods now, gods that do not live in the mead hall, but in the crushing, black deep, and we have only just begun to learn their names. The salt is cold again. The ice is melting. The silence is ours once more. The fjord begins to breathe, the rhythmic, slow movement of the tide returning. The longships groan in the fracturing ice, and the smoke of the great hall seems distant and impossible. We are the masters of the coast, but tonight, the deep has spoken and its word is cold. The song is finished, but the sea remembers. The waves come back. The ice is gone. The fjord is whole.